Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Dairy Signal, where we bring to you pertinent topics, sometimes top of mind, what you need to know today or tomorrow, or even plan for the next harvest season. So, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dairy Signal. If this is your first time, I encourage you to even look back at the catalog of countless topics, as we are well off and maybe past the 200 mark as far as episodes and content for you at your disposal. For those that are listening live, I also encourage you to engage in the discussion, own it, home in, and really fine tune those questions. Make sure it's going in the direction you intended it to. For those that are watching or listening to after the fact, through whatever platform is best for you, still reach out. These are resources that are vital and important to you. So if you need help making connection with any of these contacts, by all means, let us know how we can help you make contact, but hopefully they help fill not only your cup, but hopefully help your business. Without further ado, I do want to tune into today's discussion as we talk about a lot of the probably top of mind for folks when we talk about conservation. And some people will call it that low-hanging fruit as we talk about waterways or grassways, but it's sometimes overlooked. So who better than to have with us today? We have Todd Prill. So he's Northwest Region Outreach Specialist with the Ag Water Quality Program at UW Extension. He's been around the block a time or two, seen a thing or two, but very passionate when it comes to the discussion of water quality, soil health, and how to bring it all together for your fellow dairy farmers. So without further ado, Todd, thank you for joining us today and talking about this topic, bringing it to light of not only, what they are, but as we prepare into the summer season and move into the fall, how do we maintain or put more new ones in? So I'll turn it over to you, Todd.
Thank you, Cassie. Just to let people know, I am one of five different regional specialists for the Ag Water Quality Program. As you mentioned, I'm in the Northwest area. There's some other folks in Central, Eastern, Southwest, and Southern areas of the state. So you can definitely go onto our website and you can get contact information for those folks, as well as get some more information to follow up maybe on what we're talking about today or other things relating to ag water quality. So my discussion is going to be on soil erosion and grassed waterways. And just wanted to sort of touch on what are some of the terminology we use for soil erosion, give a refresher on what those terms mean, go through sort of a research case study that Discovery Farms did analyzing runoff and soil loss from waterways before and after they were installed. Talk about why fall is a good time as we get out and get harvesting done. Why fall is a good time to sort of look at how our cropping systems are managing that soil erosion and things to look for when we're out harvesting. And if we got a little time at the end, just some things to think about conservation-wise with dealing with possible early harvest the way it seems to be right now. Things are sort of running a little bit ahead. So some things to think about as you move into fall with that. So to start out with, soil water erosion is a three-step process. There's detachment, where a portion of the soil, whether it's the sand, silt, clay, or organic matter portion, somehow gets separated from all the others. And that can be done through raindrops falling, through water moving, even wind moving it off, but we're going to stick to the water erosion portion today. So there's some kind of detachment of that soil particle. And then the next step is transport. So moving water, be it from rainfall, be it from snowmelt, water is moving across the landscape and it's picking up these loose soil particles and taking them away from where they were sitting before. So you got transport, and then the final step in that soil erosion process is deposition. So maybe sometimes that soil actually drops out in the field. It moves from the hill and ends up falling out on the flat spot of the field. Or sometimes what ag water quality we're trying to prevent is it moving off the field into road ditches or into surface waters that are nearby, those kind of things. The soil is going to drop out somewhere. Hopefully we can, if it does move, we want to keep it as much in the field as possible. So that's sort of the three-step process for soil erosion. One of the things that Discovery Farms has done in their 25 years is sort of figure out when is this soil erosion happening? It's not equally spaced out amongst all the months. And it's not just because we have frozen soil, it's not going to go anywhere then, but it's looking at even within the growing season, are we seeing some differences there? And when we look at this annual runoff, an interesting thing that they found is there's really not a whole lot of water runoff. We get about 30 to 32 inches on average in Wisconsin, but only about 3.5 inches of that water actually runs off the land. The rest of it either infiltrates and is used by plants, or if there's enough of it, it actually will move down through the soil profile and get into our groundwater. So when you think that there's 30 inches of rain and only 4 inches roughly is running off, um, when it happens, it's obviously going to be moving some dirt because we see evidence of that soil erosion. So that's why it's important to know when that erosion is happening. And what Discovery Farms has found is that that time period from April, May to June, we are having roughly 70% of the soil loss uh, happening during those 3 months. And it makes sense as to why that's happening. One of the things traditionally, there's been tillage happening uh, on fields, and so we're loosening that soil. We're providing that detachment away from the rest of the soil. That's one thing that's happening. We are also, as we move towards more annual crops like corn and soybeans and away from perennial crops like alfalfa, we're having less soil cover out there during that spring time frame. So we have sort of less things absorbing the energy of the raindrops and water running off of the fields. And the other thing that is interesting that sort of seems to happen is we have frequent rainstorms. They may not always be these big rainstorms, but frequent rains also contribute to runoff because we get sort of a micro saturation at the surface, and
Mhm.
you hit 3, 4, 5 days in a row of rain, it's not going to go down, it's going to go sideways off of that soil. And so those are sort of the conditions we have in that April to June timeframe that allow for a greater chance of erosion. We see it taper off as we get into July, August, September. Sort of the opposite's happening. We have cover over this bare soil with growing crops usually. So they're actually absorbing a lot of that rainfall energy and not allowing the rainfall to immediately impact the soil and loosen it up. And we're also seeing a declining frequency in number of storms as well as that intensity. So that's why we don't see as much runoff at the end of the year, this time of year until harvest as we would have seen in that April through June timeframe. Sorry. So that's what's happening. Erosion's moving off during that April, May, and June. So a lot of our decision making should be looking at what can we do in that time frame to minimize soil erosion.
Mhm.
It's complicated a little bit because as Wisconsin has done some research on how has weather patterns changed over time, Wisconsin, there's stuff from 1950 precipitation amounts compared to 2023. That time frame, we're looking at how much water is actually coming in the form of precipitation. And what I'm showing here is from March, April, and May timeframe. So it shows state of Wisconsin, all the counties basically, with the exception of a few, have had a increase in precipitation amounts during that time frame, and fairly significant, as in 20% increases in precipitation. So from 1950 to 2023, there's been a 25% or 20% increase in a lot of counties in the amount of rain that falls in that March, April, May timeframe. So not only do we have conditions ready for erosion, we're also getting more water at that time. And the predictions for the next 20 years look the same. There's going to be some more increasing in water the way the modeling is showing it. So we're not going to be going back to what 1950 levels are. We're going to have to deal with more precipitation. So as we look at erosion, we know when it's happening. There's different kinds of erosion. And that's important to know the different kinds so that when we want to address how to reduce it, it's important to know the source that's happening. So I've broken them out. There's splash, there's sheet, there's rill, and there's gully erosion. And as we go from splash down to gully, it's important to note that it gets more visible. The erosion that we see is more visible as we move towards that gully, but that doesn't necessarily mean that gully is the main contributor of soil erosion. Sheet and rill erosion and splash are all have a part of erosion happening on the landscape. So it's important to understand that even though gully is very visible, it's not necessarily the main source of soil erosion happening. So splash is just sort of when we talk about a raindrop falling, having that energy, hitting the soil, breaking off the aggregates of soil into smaller particles and making it so that displacement that I talked about earlier, that's what's happening in splash erosion. That energy from that raindrop is displacing the soil. So ways to address splash erosion are going to be ways to sort of how do we protect that soil? Having crop residues there, either in the form of corn grain type residues that are actually acting as a barrier to that raindrop hitting bare soil, or we're actually growing, actively growing crops, perennial crops like alfalfa or even cover crops act as a shield on that soil because the raindrop is hitting that plant material rather than hitting bare soil. So those are some of the ways we can minimize erosion from splash erosion. Sheet erosion is where water is moving across the soil surface. It's sort of moving in a uniform, somewhat uniform layer. And as it moves across, it has energy and it picks up these displaced soil particles on the way and moves them either from one part of the field to another part of the field or actually will remove them right off of the field. And again, the same kind of concept practices that worked with splash erosion for protection. Can we get some kind of covering on that soil in the form of residue or a growing crop? The other thing that can sort of minimize the damage sheet erosion does is we have some kind of contour uh, grass buffer strip put in, or we plant crops on the contour, where we get these long slopes where water sort of builds up steam going down these slopes. If we can have these contours in place, it slows that water down and minimizes the erosion thing. It sort of takes that energy, kinetic energy of the water and dissipates it. So those are some things we can look at doing to try and minimize that sheet erosion. Rill erosion, it's getting where we're seeing instead of a whole sheet of soil sort of moving, we're starting to see these little channels develop across the field. And rill erosion is can happen anywhere in the field. And you get a couple inch deep and wide channels that'll form. That's going to happen all the time. But when we start seeing it widely spread out across the field, or certain areas really have a concentration of this rill erosion, that's sort of an indicator that, okay, this area of the field maybe needs to have some different kind of practices on it to minimize that erosion that's happening there. And the final one, gully, probably what most people are familiar with or see, is large channels that have eroded out. And these tend to be definitely in areas of the field where water concentrates, it flows off the field. Usually that's where we're going to see those gullies. And gullies can get so big where equipment cannot even get through them. So that's how much soil can be lost in a gully situation. And it's important that we try and do two things with gullies. That is, reduce the amount of water that gets to these concentrated flow areas through different practices. And then once the water is in there, we need to look at having some kind of sod or vegetation in those concentrated flow areas to stabilize the soil there so that it's not being readily moved with that moving water. So those are the kinds of erosion that can happen. In Wisconsin, what we do is from a from a erosion calculation, it's a natural process. And so when we look at erosion, some is going expected to happen just naturally. We've got a certain level that's acceptable when we start talking about nutrient management plans, soil conservation plans, those kind of things. There's a calculation that's done called a revised universal soil loss equation, takes into various considerations as far as soil type, amount of rainfall, what kind of crops are growing. Those factors are all figured in, and a soil loss calculation is performed. So maybe a lot of farms familiar with Snap Plus. In that software program, this Russell program does the soil loss calculations for it. And a lot of these nutrient management plans require farms to be farmed, fields to be farmed to T. T is the tolerable soil loss that a soil can handle and still be able to be productive over the long term. So a lot of the rules say you can't exceed that T value. Okay, so the Russell equation is used to calculate whether your soil loss is meeting that T, exceeding it or not. And in Wisconsin, most T values for soils range from 2 to 5 tons to the acre. But I think we need to just take a little step back. 5 tons of acre lost annually is equal to losing a thickness of a dime every year. Doesn't seem like a lot. When we start thinking in long-term approaches, and I think that's what we need to do with erosion, is if you're losing that thickness of a dime every year, after 5 years, you've lost a 1/4 inch of soil. And when you start looking at the lifetime or career of a farmer, 50 years or so, you've lost 2.5 inches of soil. So even though that's a tolerable level in some soils, it's maybe not what farms really want to have happening on their soils, because you're losing organic matter, phosphorus, other things when you're losing that soil. So how do we look at trying to keep soil loss down under T possibly?
So
Well, we
then
got to
on the
go
flip
ahead.
side, just to put it in perspective, if you continue to lose that, when you get to that 1/4 of an inch, that half inch mark, I mean, can you go into just for a moment here, like what it would take to build that back? Because it's not an overnight just to put it into context or perspective for our listeners.
The old saying was it takes about 100 years to build an inch of soil.
Okay.
Okay, so um, again, tolerable doesn't mean we're going to be productive over the long term, but how long, right? If we keep losing more than what we can build, if we're losing 2.5 inches and we're only potentially building an inch, we're not coming out ahead. So yeah, we're losing a lot of nutrients. And that's where the issue is coming in is if we just stay with T, we're probably still losing nutrients we don't want to lose. We're
Mhm.
losing organic matter that can help us maintain productivity. So let's start looking at ways we can keep that soil where it's at and minimize the runoff from a production standpoint. And
Mhm.
from a water quality standpoint, the less phosphorus that's leaving that field, the less chance we have of that water turning a shade of green that nobody really likes.
Yes,
So does that
absolutely.
that give you an answer to?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yep. So we do know that crop management practices, if they're put on fields that are highly erosive and we're not really matching closely the practice that's needed to maintain soil loss to a minimum with the soil landscape characteristics, we can actually accelerate erosion beyond that T level. And that's what we don't want either. So we need to try and fit what's our system that works for our soil type. We got to recognize there's limitations in the landscape of what we can do. Maybe not every field can handle a very intensive annual crop corn bean rotation. Or if it is, it has to have very limited tillage. And that's sort of what our goal is today, to try and identify, where do certain practices fit in? What can we do to try and minimize that? Because the picture here that I'm showing is a field with a lot of real erosion happening. So whatever cropping system this farm is doing, it's not matching what the erosion potential of that field is. And no one wants to see this. And so how could this farm look at that field and say, okay, we've got some erosion happening here. what are things I can do to try and manage it and minimize that erosion? And this is what I sort of came up with is sort of a scale that talks about intensity and frequency, where depending on what practices we choose, that sort of determines what our risk is for soil erosion. And so lower risk items are going to probably have less cropping intensity. We're probably going to have things on the landscape that our goal there is that's what we're shooting for, is to try and minimize and lower that risk. We have to recognize some of our farm practices are a higher risk, and doesn't mean that we should go away from them. It just means we got to recognize it's just a higher risk of erosion. And maybe we need to do something to offset that higher risk so that we're not having erosion rates exceeding what the land can handle. So, what are some of the things that we can look at and try and use to lower our erosion? So, living roots are one thing. As we've been doing, moving more towards corn soybean rotation in a lot of areas as animals move off the landscape, we're getting more intensive. We're getting more frequency where we're planting those annual row crops. We're increasing the chance of erosion. So just need to recognize that if there's really steeper fields or very long sloped fields, maybe if in a dairy situation, we can look at trying to add in, alfalfa is a perennial crop. Maybe we're going to move towards Italian ryegrass or some other grass, or even a small grain that's a narrow seeded row crop. Something on these steeper soils, more erosive fields, the more we can add in the rotation, something with a perennial crop or a narrow seeded row crop, we're going to reduce our risk of erosion. Slope length, as we've gone to larger fields, we've actually taken out field fence rows. But when we've done that, we've by default sort of lengthened these slopes out longer. And when we do that, we just increase the chance of erosion. So maybe there's some way we can break up these long slope lengths in central eastern Wisconsin where they're not as steep as down in Grant County, but you get a lot of water on these slopes and they've got 200-300 feet of unabated flowing of water. They're going to do some erosion damage. So maybe we can look at like I said, trying to plant on the contour is one thing, or we add in buffer strips occasionally across that slope to just slow the water down enough where we're not having all this dislodgement of soil and moving off the field. The one big thing that Discovery Farms has seen in their research, soil disturbance is the thing that really increases our chance for erosion. So if we're chiseling and vertical tilling, we are disturbing that soil enough where we really increase erosion if we get a rainfall at the wrong time. So anytime we can try and put no-till, strip till, or even low disturbance manure application, if we can use that kind of equipment in these more erosive fields, we're going to just reduce our chances of erosion there. And the final thing I have is off-season cover, sort of going back to that time of the highest erosion rates is that April, May, June time. We don't have a lot of cover now as we've moved away from dairy rotations. So we have a lot of bare soil out there that we maybe didn't before. So is there any way we can try and offset that bare soil, leaving corn stubble as far as corn grain residue on top of the surface? Can we grow a cover crop, adding in a perennial crop? Those things can all help reduce, again, erosion on some of these fields that need a little extra help to keep erosion from becoming a problem. All right. So in addition to those practices, it's important that we don't forget about these concentrated flow areas where water's coming off of the field and still moving. Regardless of what we do on a majority of the field, surface runoff is always going to occur. We talked about that 3 inches, that 3.5 inches. Regardless of what tillage system or whether or not someone's putting on a cover crop, there's still going to be 3 to 4 inches of water at least moving off that field at some point. And when it moves into these concentrated flow areas, if we're not correctly managing those areas, we can have problems. So the picture I have shows a no-till field with a cover crop, but there's still a gully that's probably 2 feet deep and at least 2 to 3 feet wide in a spot. They're doing the practices outside on the field and addressing soil movement there, but there's still enough water moving that when we get in these concentrated flow, we need to put in something, and that would be a grassed waterway. These high flow areas, we need to definitely think about that is the practice that needs to be in place in these high flow areas. Because what is that waterway doing? It's providing erosion protection. First of all, we got we get these storms sometimes that are 3, 4, 5 inches at a rainfall event, and that water is not going to infiltrate in. There's going to be runoff. And so that waterway basically stabilizes when that water runs off and moves down the landscape. It's providing a stable way for that water to get from field areas to off outside the field area. And when it's conveying that excess surface runoff, the other thing it's doing is it's not, if we don't have a constructed waterway, sometimes what'll happen, we'll get flat spots in these areas, and we'll actually have ponding water happening. So then we get not only erosion happening in these areas, but then you start getting ponded water, saturated soils, which create problems for even more erosion or create problems for cropping as we're losing cropland due to wet spots in the field. So a secondary advantage of the waterways is not only erosion control, but it's actually taking that water that we're not going to get any use of off the field safely and not having it pond and create more problems. And finally, another advantage of these grassed waterways is they're acting as a filter. They're going to filter out sediment that comes from the field areas, flows to these concentrated flows. It'll filter out, as long as it's in grass, pull out that sediment, pull out that phosphorus and other organic matter nutrients, and actually keep it in the field. We'll eventually have to take care of that, but it's better than having it flow off the field and again into neighboring waters or into wetlands and those kind of things. So that's the real advantage. There's a lot of reasons why waterways are a very critical part of a conservation system on land. So Discovery Farms sort of did looking at what we know this. Let's try and get some numbers to how a waterway impacts soil erosion. And so they started a project in 2018 in Northeast Wisconsin where Discovery Farms took, I don't know the size of this particular basin, but they basically try and take between a 5 and 10 acre part of a field, and where it runs off that 5 to 10 acres, they'll put in sort of a collection system. So that's what they did here is they had a waterway, they had 2 fields, one where a waterway was not in place and they went to construct a new one, and one where there was an existing waterway, but it had filled in with sediment. It wasn't working the way it should be. And so they were going to repair and renew that waterway. So I'm just flashing up a graphic here that sort of shows how Discovery Farms does that. They have this flume like I said, there's the point where the water leaves that 5 to 10 acre watershed. They have a metal collection, basically V-shaped collection system. And all the water that's in that 5 to 10 acres that runs off goes through this metal flume. And then there's a house next to it that has instruments that gauges how much water, how deep was the water that ran off during certain events. And when there's events where there's runoff, it's actually sampling that water as far as nutrient content for sediment, phosphorus, nitrogen, and those kind of things. So that's what was happening on these waterway systems. So as we look at the system, there's a picture here that just shows the waterway beforehand, dirt, you can see a little bit of erosion there. But then I have the data that shows from that collection system from 2019 to 2024. And it's showing, the first graph is showing total annual precipitation. Before the waterway was put in, it went anywhere from about 35 to 40 inches the first 2 years in 2019 and 2020. And then in 21, 22, 23, 24, it sort of varied from about 25 inches up to 40 inches as well. So my main point of showing this graph is we had some variation in precipitation, but it's not like we didn't have any precipitation happening after these waterways went in, because it's going to be important to show that with the next slide, next page. The other thing that we have showing on the far right graph is how it talks about runoff depth. And that's just gauging how intense were these storms. And basically, the before the waterway was put in, this 2019 and 2020, are basically the same as what was afterwards. So we didn't, just showing again, we have about the same amount of precipitation and about the same intensity. But when we look at the soil loss, it's not the same. And so where we had the waterway, completely new waterway put in and constructed in 2019 and 2020, we were getting anywhere from about 15,000 pounds of soil loss in 2019 and 50,000 pounds of soil loss in 2020. They constructed the waterway, and after that, everything was probably 200 pounds or less the next 3 years in 2021, 22, and 23. So you can see where that waterway obviously was doing a huge job of preventing soil erosion from happening within that concentrated flow area. Where they renovated the waterway, there was higher levels depending on the year. We were getting close to 3,000 pounds of soil on the peak year in 2020. But after that waterway was renovated and reseeded, again, we were back down to probably 200 to 300 pounds a year soil loss. So even in a renovation situation where there was grass there, taking out that sod and having the water flow back down into the channel was very important and reduced erosion there. So this just is trying to reinforce the fact that waterways are a very important part of a whole conservation system. So properly sized and vegetated waterways are effective at reducing soil erosion. Waterways need to be periodically maintained in order to continue to function properly. And when we pair those waterways with other conservation practices, be it reducing tillage or adding cover crops or something like that, we can really limit that soil erosion from happening on fields. So fall, great time to evaluate fields for erosion. Why is that? Because one thing, it gives us sort of a snapshot of how our current practices are actually controlling erosion over a long period of time. We can go out there during a storm or a big event and see erosion happening. But a lot of times, as I talked about with the different types of erosion, that may not be always the erosion that's really the dominant portion of erosion. So if we're looking at fields at the end of the fall, we can sort of see where is the sheet erosion happening, where are the rills and gullies developing, simply because we're removing that crop, right? And we have that ability to take a little closer look. And the other thing is when we run across these flow channels that have washouts in them, it's a great time to recognize we need to do something and correct this so that we don't have to have that same problem 2 years from now when we're trying to harvest the same field. So that's where fall is a good time to sort of look at those things. Things to look for. If you're looking, you go out there and you see, soil that's has covered plants sometime during the year, or plants are somewhat buried under sort of amount of soil. Small eroded channels. Those are all things that if you start to see this across wide areas of a field, or even in specific locations of a field, the tillage is probably too intense for that portion of the field. And so, as I talked about before, some things to look at and consider. If we start to see a number of rill erosion, sheet erosion, try and limit our passes as much as we can, or use low disturbance equipment. Coming on with some kind of cover crop is helpful, especially on steeper slopes. We're sort of keeping that soil in place at a time when it's normally exposed. And maybe we look at, in some cases, where we have long slopes and erosion and we're fighting with these on headland buffers, maybe we look at actually establishing a permanent grass headland buffer so that we have not only erosion control in those areas, but they can provide nice areas for field access, for loading and unloading equipment, and loads of silage and those kind of things. Um, those can be very beneficial on some steeper hills that have traditionally eroded and not yielded very well for things. So something to consider in those situations. Other areas where we have the yield monitor saying, hey, there's poor yields here, or we can visually see that there's poor plant growth. A lot of times these are areas that soil has deposited there. It's moved from somewhere else in the field, or we're having frequent water flow. If these areas are located outside of flow channels, they're sort of scattered across the field. Again, less tillage is probably the most effective thing if you can do that. But if you're also seeing uh, long slopes, you can break them up with buffer strips. Or the other thing we can look at is some of these areas in and around wetlands or low spots in the field. Maybe it's just not economically a good idea or ag water quality to crop some of these areas that are just tough to deal with. They're not productive parts of the field. If you see this poor growth or poor yielding in channels, probably the best thing you can do is not crop through them. That would be one thing, and establish a grass waterway because again, you're putting a lot of money into seed, herbicide, all that kind of stuff. And if you're going to get yields that are 50 bushel versus the rest of the field at 150 or more, maybe it's not worth trying to fight Mother Nature here and let's work with it and put in a grass waterway in these flow channels.
Not to mention years like this where a lot of us are dry, it's another forage resource that you can still harvest from.
Yep, yep, and that is yes. There's if they're constructed and you can get equipment on there, they definitely can be used for dry hay and those kind of things. So um, and don't forget, and you're looking at the field as you're going through, what do those waterway areas look like, and areas in and near a waterway as well. Um, I've got a picture here showing erosion happening in the channel. It happens to be alfalfa growing in the channel. And I think this is showing two things. Number one, that just having green there isn't necessarily going to control erosion. So having a grass or sod forming crop is much more efficient at controlling erosion than a long tap rooted crop like alfalfa. I got another picture showing a green area again left as a waterway, but it is all giant ragweed. And that is not going to be a very effective uh, controller of erosion either, because if you were to, as you go through these spots, I'm sure you're going to see erosion happening. So it's not just having a green waterway, it's having the right vegetation in there, and some kind of grass, sod forming grass is what you want in these really high moving water areas.
So Todd, in these cases where it didn't work, the first attempt or whatever attempt it is, how would you rectify this? Do you essentially like level it out and replant with a new grass mix? Like how do you correct some of these scenarios?
Yep. So if you've got gullies forming, I, so if it's just, let's take a step back. Um, if it's like the giant ragweed or you've got something else growing on, those are usually pretty simple fixes. Where yes, it may be um, you can blade it out, so make sure there's a channel there. And usually, what we talk about is the magic 30-foot wide channel. It doesn't work in all situations, but where we have a fair amount of water, it would be a bottom channel that's 10 feet wide and flat and sloping, and then the sort of the tapering the sides 10 feet to give you enough ability and capacity for that water to stay in the channel. So you'd want to shape it out in some way. It doesn't have to be that 30 feet wide, but you want something where the water is going to, once it gets there, it's not going to just pop back out of that channel somewhere else. So grading it out flat, creating a dip in the landscape where that water's running, and then yes, coming back in and seeding it with some kind of sod forming grass, brome grass. Trying to think of some others that are in the mixes, but that's where you rely on your NRCS or land conservation folks to give you the exact mix. But some kind of sod forming grass, get that in, and they can. I'll have a slide that touches on that, but they'll help you sort of set up how to establish it and some measures you can do to make sure it doesn't erode while it's establishing. It'll take that grass a little while to get established. But that case, I think you can blade it out and seed it down. In the case where a gully is forming, I think you got to look a little closer at why is that forming? Is there a culvert under a road that's causing problems? Do I need to sort of armor the road ditch with rock to take that energy that's water is coming through that culvert and that's what's causing the gully? Or is it because I just don't have the right crop there? I think that's you got to take one extra step when you're dealing with gullies as what is causing that gully to happen. So um, my final picture there is just showing what happens when waterways sort of get like me, they mature. They become less effective, right? They've filled up with soil, they've done their job, they've trapped that sediment, but now the water is not going to flow in a higher point in the landscape, and so water starts to flow along the side of the waterway and starts to create erosion problem there. So in that particular case, the same kind of scenario, coming in, taking that dirt out, field flying that soil, creating a channel back where it's supposed to be, reestablishing it with grass would be what you'd want to do here as well, and making sure that that water, when it's flowing, it's staying within the channel, not outside the channel. All right. So as we're evaluating erosion, don't forget areas around fields. Road ditches can be very telling as to whether or not we have an erosion problem, as can areas at the end of a waterway. If we're seeing pockets of sediment in these areas, again, that's an indicator. Maybe we need to do something a little bit different with our cropping system to minimize that erosion from looking like this. So where you've got it. What happens if you see that unacceptable? We sort of touched on that already. It's important to identify where do you think that erosion is coming from. Having soil in a waterway doesn't necessarily mean this waterway is eroding. It might mean that the field is actually contributing the soil to the waterway and the waterway is filtering it out. You would manage erosion in that waterway differently than you would manage erosion happening in the field. So it's important to identify where is that soil actually coming from, and then pick the solution that fits your cropping system. Here is like if the issue is, oh, I'm going to be growing corn grain and I still have erosion issues that I want to try and control. Probably the better option is to look at how I'm doing tillage rather than saying, oh, I'm going to rely on a cover crop. You're probably not going to get a cover crop seeded after corn grain, but you have the ability to minimize erosion by lessening the amount of tillage you're doing. So again, pick the solution that helps fit into your existing system. And it's important to determine that urgency. Where you have those gullies happening, there's a reason people react to them because it's a lot of soil. And so those kind of erosion problems probably need to be fixed within a year or two. If you're seeing some real erosion out in fields and occasionally you have some sheet erosion, maybe then you can say, well, I'm going to try something that's a little bit of a tweak to the system. I don't have to do a major change to what I'm doing here to get a better job of erosion control. The advantage of going in the fall and actually looking at and assessing your erosion is then you also get the ability to, in the case of waterways, come in and say, okay, we need to redo this waterway or we need to install a waterway. Let's go talk to folks on how we do that, or can we get cost share money for that? That's another advantage of going in and evaluating some of these erosion sites in the fall. The other thing is, if you're struggling with trying to figure out what to do, again, talk to other farmers in the neighborhood who have waterways and are doing different things that you're thinking about. County conservation staff, NRCS staff. Discovery Farms also has a walkover guide where they are looking at stepping you through what kind of decisions you can make depending on what is the problem here. So it sort of gives you a way to start thinking about what I observe and how can I control it. My voice is giving up. So that's it from the erosion side. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was this potential early harvest season. Some things to think about from a egg water quality standpoint and crop growth standpoint. If we're going to be taking stuff off week, 2 weeks earlier than we normally do, that's probably something to keep in mind. For this is creating a wider window for possibly putting on cover crops after corn silage or soybeans that we may not have had other years. So recognize maybe you can come on and fly it on or drill it in or do whatever system you do, but you might be able to get it on fields or that you haven't in the past simply because we're taking crops off a little bit earlier. The other side of that coin, though, is we also want to put manure on and other fall activities, right? So manure applied in September and early October, that soil temperature still is at a point above 50 degrees is sort of the number that's tossed out there. Nitrogen in that manure will be converted by the bugs in the soil into nitrates. Higher temperature soils. So when you're dealing with sandy soils, those that have fall nitrogen restrictions, just be aware that if we can avoid manure applications as late as possible on those fields, that's an advantage to us because we'll be retaining that nitrogen as a stable form instead of turning it into nitrates. Or the other option is this is where cover crops can sort of do a double duty, not only soil erosion, but they will, you get a good growing cover crop out there. It'll take up that extra nitrogen, nitrogen, and put it into their organic matter, their growth, instead of letting it be sitting in the soil, potentially leaching out with spring snow melt. So there's that. We also want to do a lot of fall tillage. Again, I understand why that happens, but just be aware, match the tillage to the landscape. If you're trying to do this on hillier fields, Discovery Farms information from 2004 to 2024 shows that if you get the wrong fall or wrong spring with fall tillage, you have really a lot of risk with soil erosion happening as compared to a spring tillage system. So in their 45 site years where they've compared this, we've got a fair number of fall tillage that are just way more soil loss. In a spring tillage system, it's down around maybe 100, 150 pounds per acre, whereas in that fall tillage, we're running a range that's way up over 10,000 pounds. So just increases your risk. So if you're going to do fall tillage, match it to the fields that can handle it erosion-wise. And my final thing is December 15th and 16th of this year, the Wisconsin Water and Soil Health Conference is being held at the Kalahari in the Dells. And a lot of the stuff that we sort of touched on here today, whether it's cover crops or manure management, nitrogen, those are the kinds of topics that are going to be covered at this conference. Some of the ones that have been identified, innovation in manure management, the RAIN 360, I think is what they're talking about with that. Nitrogen movement, sort of the latest research and what crop consultants are doing to minimize that nitrogen loss, drone seeding with cover crops. So those are all the kinds of things that'll be covered at this conference. The other thing that's happening is they are offering a scholarship for basically free registration and one night stay at the hotel, sort of a lottery system. So you're not guaranteed to get it, but you can go to go.wisc.edu/WWASH, and that'll take you to where you can apply for this scholarship. Or if you happen to be watching it, there's a QR code. You can scan that and do it that way.
Another great
So,
learning opportunity for
yep,
sure.
yep. And again, it's going to bring in more of the ag water side of things, not just be focused on production, yield driven stuff.
Yes, round out the discussion, most
Yep.
definitely.
Yep.
I think this is you guys have been doing that conference for a couple of years now, and the last couple ones that we've been able to take in, they were great meetings, great resources. So I encourage folks to come out and tune into it.
Good. Thank you.
One question that I did have, so I
Yep.
apologize to kind of have us circle back, is Wisconsin, a lot of the Midwest, we're in drought. We're dry. Some folks are talking about taking off corn silage to just capture any type of forage here at the top part of August. So if we talk about cover crops, getting those in with it being as dry as some of these areas are, what are the chances of it germinating and having the impact that we truly want out of a cover crop, let alone your water, your grassways and things like that?
We're similar to fall seeded alfalfa. We're
Okay.
at the mercy of moisture.
Okay.
So if we, I think I heard tossed around, if we get a quarter of an inch or more, you got
Mhm.
enough to germinate it.
Okay.
If if the forecast is dry, 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 that this happened to some farmers I talked to last year. That was their frustration with cover crops. They went ahead and made the decision to do them, and then they didn't get rain through all of September, and they
Okay.
really didn't get that they were hoping for. So that is sort of the gamble with it, right? You need
Mhm.
some moisture, like I said, probably a quarter inch or more to germinate that seed and get it up and going. Um, if if it's so dry, yeah, you may not want to spend the money to put the seed down, but but you really got to watch that forecast and see if there's going to be something happening. But that is just an inherent risk of anything planted in the fall, especially like this. Is we don't get moisture, it's not going to grow.
Fair enough. Pray for rain, but just the right amount, right? Beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, and whether we can get that, I don't know.
Fair enough. Well, Todd, again, thank you. Thank you for joining in with us today, giving us the pointers of what to think about, especially as we shift into the later part of summer and pivot into fall and maybe a little bit cooler weather and temps to go with it and hopefully some rain. So again, thank you. Thank you
Yep.
for joining us today, giving us a lot of stuff to think about and act on in the near future. So definitely appreciate your time here.
Thank you.
As we wrap up today's episode on the Dairy Signal, thank you. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in and making the Dairy Signal one of your vital resources. But also thank you to our national partners who help make the tool of the Dairy Signal and a lot of the programs that we put on throughout the calendar year for professional dairy producers possible. Again, they align with PDPW not only through our year, but in truth, they're really aligning with the fellow dairymen. So, guys, thank you. Thank you for being great partners. Without further ado, thank you again and have a great rest of your day.